All righty, this is the second video lecture. This one is on the Chesapeake, the founding of the Chesapeake settlements by England. All right, so let's get over to the screen. Before we get into the founding of Chesapeake, I want to talk about mercantilism. Very quickly. Mercantilism is defined as a blueprint for global economic empire. And it can be the British, the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, Portuguese, same blueprint, same goal. Okay. All right, so let's look at the formula. Formula is first, you get yourself a colony. Now, as we saw in the last video, Roanoke was supposed to be that colony. But we could easily say Hispaniola for the Spanish. We could say Montreal for the French up there in Canada, whatever. You get a colony, you get some colonizers / workers to go there, okay? So the people who had gone to Roanoke, we don't know a lot about them. We know there were about 100. They were colonists and they were the workers. Right? Then you need some kind of product. Now, we don't know what it would have been at Roanoke, but we know that, the French have their fur, right? And the English are going to get into tobacco here very soon. The Spanish have gotten into sugar. Okay, but you need some kind of product. It can be something you grow, it can be a natural resource, whatever. And if you get all this stuff, you'll have success, because the whole purpose of mercantilism is to make money. That is the only reason the system exists. You are setting up a colony, you are getting workers, and you are finding a product to make money. That's it. Now, a couple of other characteristics we need to go through. Empire is a closed system, meaning English colonies only trade with England. They don't trade with Spain. They don't trade with Spanish colonies, not legally anyway. That's a closed system. All right. No industry can be set up. I will type industry. No industry can be set up. Okay. So there's very little manufacturing because your colonists buy, they're manufactured from the, what we would call mother country, or the metropole. Okay. This will have profound ramifications on the United States when it comes into existence after the American Revolution. And finally, when it comes to the product, it's monocultural. So it's usually one major product. So again, that could be tobacco, it could be rice, it could be sugar. Okay. But you're looking for one sort of cash crop, okay, that you can sell. Right? So that's mercantilism. So let's move into settlement. Now, the chief problem with colonizing America was cost. It is very expensive to found a colony. There is the cost of transporting. You have to build. You have to keep the colonists fed until they become self-sufficient. So that's a lot of money. Rather than try to find one person with that much money, the English further developed a system already in place called the Joint Stock Company. And so you would sell stock in your company, raise funds, establish a colony. So rather than having to find one person with 10,000 pounds, maybe you find a bunch of people who can buy 50 pounds or 100 pounds or something like that, okay? That's what the English did. All of these early colonies are going to be set up as money-making ventures. The company for Jamestown is called the London Company. So they would have founded the company, incorporated the company, and then sold stock to raise money for settling Jamestown. So in 1607, Jamestown is founded. Okay, English colony. Jamestown, this goes up here. Okay. This is Virginia. This is from John Smith's map of Virginia. Okay, this is the Virginia Sea, or what we would today call the Atlantic Ocean. Here is Chesapeake Bay. This is now Delaware and Maryland. I think that's right. And this is now, of course, Virginia itself back here. Washington, D.C. would be up and around here today. Right. This is the Jamestown settlement. This is how it would look on the site. This is at the Jamestown Archaeological Dig in Jamestown, Virginia. And they have done archaeological digs. Really, they did not find the original site for Jamestown until the 1980s. Everyone had thought that the James River had actually washed away the site, but it was not until I think around 1984 or 85 that new digs were conducted that found the site of some of the original buildings. And so you can see here some archaeological digs from the 90s. It's a very beautiful place, but unfortunately it is built near a swamp, which is why Native Americans were nowhere near it. I'm going to go ahead and introduce this term because you're going to hear it a lot in the rest of the unit. Term is seasoning time. Okay. Seasoning time is, let me give you the period where colonists adjust to changes in climate, diet, and are exposed to diseases. Okay. It's much hotter in Virginia than it is in England. And as far as the new diseases go, let's go back to the swamp. Swamps have mosquitoes, and mosquitoes have, you guessed it, malaria. Okay? And so people begin to die. On average, okay, on average, half the people who get off the boat in America are dead in less than a year. And if you go down into like South Carolina or Georgia, that sometimes gets up to 3/4 of the people getting off a boat being dead in a year. A lot of it having to do with disease, particularly malaria. And not only that, you might not be getting all the food you need, so you're also malnourished while you're trying to fight malaria as well. It's a real 1-2 punch. But there's lots of land around Jamestown. You can see here. Here's the building, wooden buildings with sort of a clay mixture. So it looks like on the outside what was called the mud and stud. So here's a house with the frame of one on a site in Jamestown. And this is what they were going for. Okay. The fence is built very quickly because the Native Americans in the area are not completely thrilled about having new neighbors. So sometimes Native Americans are okay with the new neighbors, and sometimes they're in kind of a bad mood about it. So fences are built very, very quickly. This is where the old church was. We know this because church records told us 4 people were buried under the altar. Okay, so this is the outline of the original church. And this is where the altar would have been up here. Two chimneys, possibly suggesting an industrial kitchen to feed the whole colony. There's chimney 1, chimney 2 had collapsed. And eventually this basement here became basically a trash dump. So they have found a lot of artifacts in this basement. You can see some pottery here. They also found a human skull. I'll get to that in a second. This marks where the posts for the building would have been. This is how archaeologists read the ground. See here where it's smooth? That means there's nobody living on the site. Right here where it's very rough, that means people are living here. And then you see it becomes very smooth again when nobody's here. Jamestown very quickly ran into problems. What kind of problems? Well, we already talked about the disease that was running rampant in Jamestown. Also, most of the people spent their time looking for gold instead of doing something sensible like growing some food. And they also spent a lot of time arguing as well. There were 104 men at Jamestown. There were no women the first shipload. And many of these people had no idea how to do hard work. Jamestown probably would have collapsed had it not been for this man you're looking at here, Captain John Smith, who had served in military expeditions throughout Europe. If half of his stories are true, he had an amazing military career before he got mixed up with this. But he basically instituted martial law to keep the colony from falling apart and saved Jamestown from complete collapse. Smith had to leave. There was an accident, and then a supply ship failed to show up. And so that led to the winter of 1609, 1610, the starving time, which involved cannibalism of the living and the newly dead. Men dug dead people out of the graves and ate them. One among them killed his wife and ate her. Now, for a long time, there was no proof of any of this at Jamestown until that trash heap that I showed you uh, brought forth a skull. This is Jane. She's female. Women did eventually start showing up in Jamestown. These marks here on her skull are from a knife or hatchet. This is an attempt to get to the brains. She has similar markings along her jaw, trying to get to her tongue. As you can see along here, this is made by a knife cutting against the bone. This is a reconstruction done. We don't have the rest of the body, so we don't know if she died naturally, was cannibalized, or if she was murdered. We just don't know. There's nothing else besides this is all that's left of Jane. But she was found in that trash pit. So we do have proof of cannibalism, and a lot of people died at Jamestown. Yeah. So many people died at Jamestown that there was no one left to tell later settlers not to build their house over the graveyard. These rocks and all this rock here, that marks where a house was later built because there was no one left to tell them not to build over their graveyard. And some of these graves are double and triple headers. You know, they just dug one grave and were throwing 2 or 3 bodies in there. We've also got more graves outside here. So Jamestown killed a lot of people and would continue to do so for a long time. The problems at Jamestown were not a secret. A lot of letters from Jamestown to England, a lot of people complaining about the problems in Jamestown. So the London Company had a real problem on its hands. Its colony was a disaster. It was a disaster that killed people. And so the company decided it needed to make some changes. And so it made some changes to the charter. Now, these changes were made to attract settlers in spite of the bad news coming out of the colony. All right, so what is the first change? The first change is the implementation of something called the Hebright system. For every ticket you buy to Jamestown, the company will give you 50 acres of land. So if you buy your ticket, your wife, a couple of kids, a couple of servants, it's $50 for every ticket. Okay, that's a pretty good deal. Second, I'm too poor to buy a ticket. Well, you can go as an indentured servant. Okay? You go to Jamestown, and 7 years of labor for passage. Okay? I cannot type. 7 years of labor. I was trying to hit the word for here. For passage. There we go. If you survive the 7 years, and 6 out of 10 of you will, okay, you're then a free citizen of the colony. So a lot of people took advantage of this, both male and female. Particularly, this became attractive after tobacco started being grown, the people of Jamestown realized they needed workers. And so you began to see a lot of white indentured servants coming from England. This is obviously before slavery. We'll get to that story later on. Um, 7 years is optimal. If you break the law, they might add more time to your service. If you get pregnant, they'll add another year to your service because you got to take time off to have that baby. So that's time you're not doing work for me. So they're going to add more time onto your service, ladies. But this was a very attractive offer. It's probably how my people got here, honestly. Um, so there you go. And again, about 60% of white indentured servants did survive and later become landowners themselves. Third, government. Martial law had been in place since John Smith. You can't have permanent martial law, it just doesn't work. And so Jamestown was allowed a limited self-government. The citizens of Jamestown could elect a governor and elect representatives and pass their own laws. This becomes the House of Burgesses in 1619. This allows the people in Jamestown and eventually throughout Virginia to pass laws that are needed without having to wait for instructions from people back in England. These are important not only to Jamestown and its survival, but all of these reforms were adopted by the next wave of colonies that followed Jamestown. Even with these reforms, Jamestown continued to kill people. Okay. The mortality rate continued to be shockingly high until finally the tobacco market went bust. There was so much tobacco, and this is sometime in the 1620s. There was so much tobacco that the price of tobacco collapsed. I mean, it completely collapsed. Okay, we call that going bust. When that happened, farmers started growing more food crops. Okay, and mortality rates began to drop because there was a stable food supply. Okay, the same thing the Native Americans had to have. It's the same thing the English had to have, a stable food supply. That food supply, so you get a lot of grains. That also allows you to now start bringing in more animals. So we start seeing cows and pigs making their way into Jamestown and Virginia as well. So a rough start, but eventually Jamestown survives. I don't want to say succeed. None of the colonies, by the way, ever made money for the companies. Okay, no one ever made any money off these original colonies. So Jamestown survives, but it does not make any money for its investors. Okay. That is the last video we will do before class. So when we meet in class next Monday, we will start with New England and try to do as much as we can. And then whatever we don't finish in class, I'll come back here and finish up with videos. All right, so this has been the Chesapeake video, and I will see you in class.